The 12 Doomed Inheritances, the Chronicles of the Cursed Bloodline and the Archive of Souls. Introductory Prologue. There are stories that are written to be told, whispered around a dying fire to pass a long winter night, and then there are stories that are written specifically to be avoided, buried under floorboards, and erased from the conscious mind of the living. This is one of those stories, a ledger of shadows that I should have burned the moment I felt the unnatural, bone-deep chill radiating from its heavy leather binding. I have come to realize that some memories are not just thoughts, they are parasites waiting for a new host to consume. For generations, my family practiced the art of silence. We did not speak of the dead, not because of respect, but because of a frantic, clawing fear that mentioning their names would draw their attention back to the world of the living. Have you ever truly contemplated the psychological weight of a grand inheritance? Most people spend their entire lives dreaming of such a moment. They imagine the sudden windfall, the heavy brass keys to a Victorian manor, or the life-changing click of a digital bank account balance surging into the millions. They think of freedom, luxury cars, or a house by the shore where the sun never sets and the waves wash away all human responsibility. But I am here to tell you about the other kind of inheritance. The kind that does not just change your life, but slowly, meticulously, and violently rewrites your soul until you no longer recognize the face staring back at you in the mirror. It is a slow poison delivered in a golden chalice. In my family, inheritances were never occasions for celebration or joy. They were treated like a terminal diagnosis, a warning disguised as a gift, wrapped in the expensive silk of ancestral greed. I used to laugh at the stories. I dismissed them as the byproduct of a bored, superstitious lineage prone to melodrama and old-world paranoia. I thought it was just a clever way for the elders to keep us from bickering over furniture and coin. I was arrogant in my skepticism, believing that modern logic and the cold light of science could shield me from a legacy written in blood, madness, and a darkness that predates the very concept of money. Then, I found the safe. It was hidden deep within the rotting foundations of my great-uncle estate, a place where the air tasted like wet copper, ancient dust, and something far older that should not have been breathing. No one had mentioned its existence in the final will. No one wanted to claim the heavy burden it represented. It was a massive, rusted iron monolith that felt colder than the surrounding stone, as if it had been forged in a place where light was a foreign concept and heat was an enemy. It did not just sit in the room, it seemed to anchor the entire house to the dark, hungry earth beneath it. When I finally forced the heavy door to groan open, I did not find gold, jewelry, or legal deeds. I found 12 yellowed folders, each smelling of ozone, decay, and stagnant time. Each folder was meticulously labeled with a name, a year, and a specific type of inheritance. As I began to read, the air in the room grew thin and the shadows seemed to lengthen, stretching toward me like skeletal fingers eager to pull me into the paper. I realized that every single entry followed a mathematical, inescapable pattern, a fleeting spark of apparent luck, followed by a total, agonizing collapse of the self. Accidents, disappearances, financial ruin, broken families, unexplainable events that the local authorities chose to ignore out of a sheer, primal terror of the unknown. The timeline was the most terrifying part. The transition from blessing to burial was always less than 1 year. No exceptions, no outliers, no survivors. I reached the final folder, and my heart stopped in my chest. It bore my name in fresh, black ink that still looked wet under the beam of my flashlight. I was not reading family history, I was reading a prophecy of my own demise. I was reading my own autopsy before the body was even cold. I realized then that the safe was not meant to keep things in, it was meant to keep the rest of the world out. And I had just let the cycle back into the light. Now, the stories are no longer just on the page, they are in the room with me. Inheritance 1. The Modest House, 1948. It was a small, unassuming cottage on the edge of town, framed by white picket fences and blooming hydrangeas that seemed to glow with an eerie, blue light in the evening mist. The heir was Elias, a young veteran recently married to his childhood sweetheart, Clara. They moved in with hearts full of optimism, believing they had finally found their sanctuary after the horrors of the Great War. They spoke of children, of gardens, and of a future where the sound of artillery was only a distant memory. For the first month, the house was a dream of domestic bliss. But the silence did not stay peaceful, it became heavy, almost pressurized, as if the walls were leaning inward to catch their most private whispers. At night, the couple began hearing rhythmic, dragging footsteps moving through the hallway, a sound like something heavy, wet, and limbless being pulled slowly across the floorboards. They would wake up to find every interior door standing wide open, despite Elias having bolted them with military precision and reinforced the frames. Elias' wife began to lose her mind in the oppressive quiet. She stopped eating and spent her days staring at the gaps in the floorboards, convinced she could see eyes looking back. Her final diary entries were frantic. The house is not empty. It is holding its breath, waiting for us to stop moving so it can swallow us whole. I feel it watching me from the drains when I bathe. I can hear it tasting our names in the wind that whistles through the attic. Exactly 3 months later, Elias died in his sleep. His face was a mask of pure, frozen terror, his mouth locked in a silent scream that no one heard, yet the doctors ruled it natural causes, a sudden heart failure in a healthy 24-year-old with no history of illness. Clara fled the next morning without packing a single bag, claiming the house did not just feel haunted, it felt hungry. She told the police that the shadows in the bedroom had detached themselves from the floor. It remained vacant for decades, as if even the local birds and insects knew better than to cross the property line. The garden grew wild and thorny, but the hydrangeas never died, blooming a deep, sickly red every spring as if fed by something beneath the soil. Inheritance to the large ranch 1955. The ranch spanned thousands of acres of golden plains, inherited by 2 brothers, Julian and Thomas, who had been inseparable since birth. At first, the inheritance seemed to strengthen their bond. They spent their days repairing fences and dreaming of a cattle empire that would last for generations of their own children. They were men of the earth, strong and practical. But the land had a way of distorting sound and intent. The wind across the plains seemed to carry whispers that only one brother could hear at a time, pitting one against the other with subtle lies. A simple suggestion about the budget was heard as a lethal insult, a look of fatigue was interpreted as a glare of murderous judgment. They began to carry rifles, not for predators in the brush, but for each other. Neighbors reported hearing screams echoing across the fields, not of anger, but of a visceral, ancient hatred that sounded amplified by the very soil they walked upon. One ranch hand quit after hearing Julian whisper to a fence post in the dead of night, "This land divides what it touches, and I am the blade that will cut my brother out of it until he is nothing but dust." Within a year, the brothers were sworn enemies who would not even stand in the same room without reaching for their knives. Within 2, they had liquidated their lives to pay for a legal war that left them both destitute and broken. The ranch was eventually sold for pennies to a developer who went bankrupt before the first shovel hit the dirt. The brothers died years later in separate cities, alone and forgotten, having never spoken another word to a living soul. They left behind a legacy of silence that was louder than any argument they ever had, a void where a family used to be. Inheritance 3. The grocery store 1962. A cornerstone of the community, the store was a humble but bustling business. When Arthur inherited it, he was determined to turn it into a modern marvel of commerce. He reorganized the shelves, expanded the inventory, and worked 18-hour days, his pride swelling with every sale and every satisfied customer. However, the family business soon became a family curse. Relatives he had not seen in years emerged from the woodwork like termites, accusing him of embezzlement and hidden greed. They haunted the aisles, not as customers, but as ghosts of resentment and spite, watching his every move. Every dinner became an interrogation, every smile from a cousin was a hidden threat. Arthur began to sleep in the back room, afraid to leave his post. One rainy Tuesday, Arthur walked out the back door to receive a delivery from a truck that never arrived. He never returned. No blood was found, no signs of a struggle, and no body was ever recovered. The police investigation lasted 2 days before the officers simply gave up, citing a lack of evidence and a strange, overwhelming reluctance to stay in the store after the sun went down. It was as if the town itself had swallowed him whole to settle a debt. The most chilling part followed in the months that came. For weeks after his disappearance, customers swore they saw him. He would be seen stocking the canned goods in the dark or standing silently behind the register in the dim light of dusk. When approached, he would offer a hollow, terrifyingly wide smile and point toward the back room before vanishing into the shadows of the aisles. The store was eventually boarded up with heavy timber, but locals still crossed the street to avoid the feeling of cold, dead eyes watching them from behind the dusty, cracked glass of the front window. Some say they can still hear the bell above the door ringing at midnight. Inheritance 4. The antique jewelry 1971. The collection was breathtaking, emeralds the color of deep-sea shipwrecks and gold that seemed to pulse with a faint, internal heat. The women of the Thorne family felt like royalty when they wore the pieces, but the transformation was psychological and swift. The jewelry acted as a conductor for pure malice. It did not just sit on their skin, it seemed to sink into their veins, chilling their blood and replacing their empathy with a cold, metallic hunger for status. Sisters who had shared everything since childhood began to hide their belongings and poison each other's reputations with acidic lies. A mother accused her own daughter of wanting her dead just to claim a specific sapphire brooch. One recorded entry in a ledger noted, "When the cold metal touches my skin, my own thoughts are pushed into a dark corner of my mind. Something else, something old and cruel, thinks for me now. It wants me to hurt the ones I love. It enjoys the salt of my tears and the sound of breaking hearts." Within 12 months, 3 separate marriages in the family ended in violent, inexplicable divorces. When the jewelry was finally sold to a private collector in Europe, he became a hermit, refusing to take the rings off even as his fingers withered and turned black from lack of circulation. He was found dead months later, the jewelry seemingly the only thing keeping his desiccated corpse upright in his chair. The gems, however, remained as bright and beautiful as the day they were forged in the fires of greed, waiting for a new throat to wrap themselves around. Inheritance 5. The Cash Money 1983. It was a literal mountain of currency, stacks of bills that promised a life where no desire would go unfulfilled. But the moment the first bill was counted, the air in the room turned poisonous and thick with a static charge. The greed was not merely human, it was infectious, a fever that burned through the family until nothing was left but ash and bitterness. Trust vanished overnight. Siblings who had raised each other became cold predators. They hired private investigators to tail one another, looking for any reason to disqualify a share of the loot. A hidden tape recorder from a final family meeting captured a sound that still haunts the archives. Beneath the screaming of the heirs, a low, guttural voice, not belonging to anyone in the room, kept chanting mine, 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 in a rhythmic, wet growl. By the end of the year, the money was gone, lost to legal fees, bad bets, and a mysterious fire that claimed the family estate and everyone inside it. The family tree was severed. The few survivors became bitter strangers, bound only by their mutual loathing and the hollow, echoing feeling in their chests. They had everything they ever wanted, and it cost them everything they ever were. Inheritance 6. The Properties 1990. The heir inherited a vast portfolio of city buildings but soon became a prisoner within their steel and glass. He claimed the walls were shrinking by millimeters every day and that the shadows in the corners were growing teeth to bite him. He stopped leaving his office, convinced that the outdoors was an elaborate illusion designed to trick him into falling. He began to draw architectural plans on his own skin with a razor. He was eventually found merged with the architecture itself, his body part of the very brick and mortar, his face a permanent, screaming fixture in the stone of the lobby that no amount of cleaning could remove. Inheritance 7. The Art Collection 1998. The portraits in the gallery began to change when no one was looking directly at them. The painted eyes followed visitors with a hungry intensity, and the landscapes grew darker and more desolate each morning. Figures that were once in the background moved to the front of the canvas, their hands reaching toward the frame. The lead curator committed suicide after claiming the figures in the paintings were trying to swap places with him during the night. He left a note saying, "The frames are not borders, they are doorways, and I have left the key in the lock. I can feel the oil paint in my lungs." Inheritance 8. The Business 2005. A tech empire that crumbled when the CEO became convinced the servers were broadcasting his private sins and secret thoughts to the entire world. He began to hear the hum of the cooling fans as whispers of his own name and his hidden failures. Paranoia became the only product they manufactured. He was last seen screaming at a motherboard in an empty data center, trying to claw the digital data out of the silicon with his bare fingernails until they bled. He believed he could find his soul inside the code, but there was only binary darkness. Inheritance 9. The Bank Account 2012. The balance on the screen changed constantly, forming patterns and dates, specifically the death dates of everyone the heir loved. Every time he withdrew money for a luxury, someone he knew fell ill or died in an accident. He tried to close the account, but the bank had no record of its existence in their systems, yet the paper statements kept arriving in his dreams, written in blood and signed by a hand that looked like his own but older and more decayed. He eventually spent the last of the money to buy a coffin he would never use. Inheritance 10. The Land 2017. Excavators on a new construction site unearthed a series of stone jars containing human teeth and braided hair. The project was immediately halted, but every worker who touched the jars suffered a freak accident within the following 6 months. Some fell into open pits, others were crushed by stationary machinery that should not have been running. The land remains a scarred, black pit where nothing grows and the air is always 10 degrees colder than the surrounding area. Locals claim that if you stand in the center, you can hear the sound of 1,000 people whispering under the dirt. Inheritance 11 The Will 2021. A document that seemed to rewrite itself in real time as the family read it. As the heirs looked at the parchment, the words changed to reveal their darkest, most shameful secrets for all to see. Every sin was catalogued. Family members began to lose their voices, literally unable to speak their own names, as if their identities were being stripped away and stored in the ink of the page. They became silent, hollow shells, wandering the estate like ghosts before they were even dead, their eyes empty of everything but a deep, reflective sorrow. Inheritance 12 The Safe 2024. And finally, my inheritance. The safe. The folders. The cycle reaching its terminal point. The moment I understood the pattern, I stopped being a witness and became a participant in this long, dark play. I tried to outsmart the legacy. I moved the safe to a remote, high-security storage facility in the middle of the desert where no one lived. I changed my name. I moved across the country 3 times in 6 months. But the calls began immediately. Unknown numbers that played only the sound of heavy breathing and the dragging of wet, heavy feet on cold stone. This morning, I returned to the storage unit for the last time, driven by a compulsion I could not fight. The heavy steel door was bent outward from the inside, the metal torn like thin paper. The safe was wide open, its heavy door hanging off the rusted hinges. Inside, there was a 13th folder that had not been there before. It was empty, except for a small, ancient mirror glued to the back. When I looked into it, my reflection did not move when I did. It stood still, looking over my shoulder at something standing in the dark behind me. It just stood there, smiling a wide, Arthur-like smile, and whispered a single word into my ear, next. I can feel the cold metal of the safe in my dreams now. Epitaph. Here lies the vanity of the living, who mistook a debt for a gift and a heavy iron shackle for a golden crown. They thought they were the masters of their fate, but they were merely the latest entry in a ledger of suffering. This legacy died the moment the first coin was spent, the first door was opened, and the first heart was hardened against its own blood. It is a ghost that eats gold and drinks tears. What remains is not wealth, nor land, nor gold, but the hollow, eternal echo of a scream across 12 doomed generations. The earth is full, and the safe is hungry. The shadows have been fed, the accounts are balanced, and the ink of the final contract is dry. The debt is paid in full, and yet it is never over. The cycle is complete and the safe is open for you. Do not look back. Your name is already being carved into the cold, waiting stone of the earth.
The journey doesn't end here. If you want to keep discovering more stories and surprises, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. I promise what's coming next will be even more exciting. See you in the next chapter.